Number 3. Cambriolage. Verdant hillsides swept briskly and silently by. Corinne stared blankly as a few large raindrops streamed horizontally across her reflection. This train had been well used, this carriage well abused. Dirty windows shielded the passengers from unappealing weather without, whilst bright fluorescent lights exuded a stark blue-grey coziness within. Fortunately, this afternoon the carriage was so underpopulated that Laurent had managed to lay claim to the imaginatively monikered Espace Convivial for himself and Corinne. This meant they gloried in bristly blue upright seats that faced each other, separated by a lavish pull-down wood-effect table for sugary drinks to bounce and spill thereupon. It was late afternoon. Although the April sunset wasn't officially due for a few hours yet, dusk seemed to have drifted by a few small villages ago. Rain pattered gently on the metallic ceiling, encouraging Corinne to pull on her black woolen coat, which she tangled with awkwardly in the limited space afforded by her deluxe seat. "You didn't have to come along," said Laurent. "I heard Montpellier was warm this time of year. I guess I heard wrong," Corinne replied. Derelict train stations, disused rolling stock, and a scrapyard ambled by as the train decelerated and bumped around more vigorously on the rails. Laurent checked his watch. "Is this job for your cousin?" Corinne asked. "No, this one's different. I stopped working for Remy when he joined the Sûreté." "I don't follow. I thought Remy got you into this. He is your cousin, isn't he?" Corinne probed further. Laurent never was very talkative. When they first met, Corinne assumed he was just unsure of English, yet he was perfectly competent. She later found he wasn't much more forthcoming in French. "Kind of. When I was at university, with the cash flow problems that students have, Remy sent a few small jobs my way. Cash in hand, you know." Laurent mimed a kind of backhand under-the-table action. He continued, "Easy stuff, like seeing whether a guy is actually working late in the evening and he's not with his mistress, or having a long lunch in a bistro with his other mistress, or maybe finding grounds for divorce, tracking down absentee fathers. That was the sort of thing that buttered the bread at Remy's agency." "Sounds very French," Corinne replied, leaning forward and listening attentively with her chin in her hands. She smiled gently at Laurent's peculiar turns of phrase, which weren't really French or English. She found them an alluring mix, charming yet stupid in equal amounts. Her smile melted Laurent enough that he elaborated further. Maybe? In Cartier, where Remy had been seen already, he sent me along instead. As a student, I found this work perfectly easy, and although the surveillance part was often boring, it was also very fascinating at other times. I think the clients even profited in the long run. But this job isn't for Remy." "No, a friend of his friend asked Remy, and he proposed it to me. It was a very sudden affair. Unusual too, in that the client did not concern about my tariff. Remy texted me an address to visit in Perroir near Montpellier. He unravelled a tatty yellow post-it note from his jacket pocket. Rue Louis Pasteur, 71. Visibly the occupant is missing, and the client concerned about his whereabouts, so I am charged with finding out anything regarding his absence." A train flashed by in the opposite direction, interrupting the conversation. As it passes, large signs on tall posts flick past the windows. Corinne peers out at acres of retail parks, wide repetitive concrete vistas, most of which seem somewhere between deserted and derelict, spattered with meaningless graffiti which itself showed signs of age. A jolly man mumbles something over the train's loudspeakers, which nobody can decipher, whether they be French, English or Venusian. The train slows further. "I think we're nearly there," Laurent said, searching for sparse clues in the gloom outside. Corinne shrugged. Searching out the probable number 71 as Laurent paid the taxi driver, Corinne tightly clasped 2 baguettes, still warm from the evening boulangerie. She adjusted her glasses, squinting with some difficulty at house numbers in the near dark. It seemed a pleasant enough neighbourhood, with buildings sparingly arranged around a quiet road. All were plain beige and brown cookie-cutter clones of each other. Clean, tidy, orderly, and completely nondescript. The taxi driver carried away with him what little light his headlights afforded as Laurent joined her. They both identified the correct address from the postbox, jam-packed with damp junk mail. As they glanced inside it, they were startled by an old lady suddenly peeping over the neighbouring garden hedge in the darkness. She must have reached 90 some years ago, yet was still tending vegetables in her garden at this late hour on a chilly April evening. She rambled on in the most amiable and energetic manner to Laurent, who seemed to understand every word, despite her peculiar dialect, coupled with Yoda-like delivery. She went away for a moment, returning with a bundle of spring onions for Gary, who was a very likeable young man, but a bit reserved as these English usually are. Laurent lied that they were Gary's visiting cousins, to which the old lady replied that she hadn't seen him lately, but that was nothing especially unusual, as Gary often went away for short spells with his car, and generally kept himself to himself. She pointed to a vacant area on the drive, identifiable only by an oil patch in a rectangular area, lacking in moss. Corinne pretended to shiver, which the old lady acknowledged, wished them bon appetit, and left. They climbed the stairs, which were still covered in wet leaves from the tempest a week ago, to the first floor door of number 71. After having called out conspicuously with a familiar cousinly cuckoo, and having made certain that the old lady had departed, Laurent produced a drill-type gadget from his pocket. This surprised Corinne. A quick buzz of whirring pins and the lock sprung open. She never suspected him to be such an expert housebreaker. Pushing the door ajar, they called out for anyone. Nobody home. The house was arranged upside down, as southern French houses conventionally are, with the hall, living room and kitchen upstairs, bedrooms, bathroom and garage downstairs. There weren't any letters, Laurent said as he fumbled for any light switch to anywhere. After the ceiling fan hummed a while, he reached for the string by it, and suddenly they were blinded. He doesn't use this light much either. How do you know all these things? Since when did you become Sherlock Holmes and Arsène Lupin rolled into one? Corinne asked him in a surprised tone, pointing to the door lock as she closed it. Laurent smirked. Elementaire, ma chérie Corinne. See how bright this is? It's an iridescent bulb from 2006 or so. If it had been used, it would have expired by now. He entered the living room as Corinne pulled the strings repeatedly until the fan stopped turning. She was quite cold enough already. Maybe he just isn't here very often. It's possible. His reply came as a slow drawl as she entered the living room, which was astonishingly messy. If it had been burgled, the burglars would have tidied up. Laurent stood somewhat dumbfounded. To search for clues here, they would first need a shovel. His intention had been to avoid disturbing the scene, although it was difficult to imagine how anyone could ever tell whether he, Corinne, or a herd of elephants had been through here. All this clutter didn't gather overnight, Laurent continued. They both paused for a moment, wondering where to start. Racks of imposing shelves overflowed precariously with books of all sizes, sparsely decorated with samples of coral, fossils, and unusual rocks of exotic origin. These surrounded a dirty, disused aquarium, itself filled with all manner of pumps, thermometers, and paraphernalia. Nearby was a printer and a mouse, memory cards, and pens, outlining a gap where a computer once stood. On the floor was a pile of box file folders, a waste paper basket with a hand-cranked shredder, some bags, envelopes, bubble wrap, glass vials, empty petri dishes, microscope slides, stamps, tickets, receipts, and printouts. The central coffee table was utter chaos, predominantly of an electrical nature. There were bulbs, wires, bits of solder, scraps of insulation, pliers, paper, old-fashioned capacitors, crocodile clips, and a few circuit boards, apparently from some museum. Hey, isn't that some kind of jukebox in the corner? Corinne excitedly rushed over to uncover it, removing an undersized dust sheet, held in place by some weighty tools, a reel of solder, some old francs, a dusty spare pane of glass, and some photocopies comprising a makeshift manual, unfastened together. Beneath the sheet stood a 1970s rockola that Gary had apparently been renovating and repairing. The panel of song titles was the only truly clean thing in the whole room, and Corinne was instantly captivated by it. To her it was like a giant chrome iPod. She had never operated one before, and although playing a jukebox was hardly a stealthy activity, they were supposed to be visiting their cousin, so in her eyes it would be all right to make plenty of noise. Laurent had already cleared himself a space on the sofa by piling a small bundle of science books on top of a larger one, now sitting with his baguette and a spring onion. Corinne wrinkled her nose at his strange meal, and whispered, "Can I?" He mumbled and shrugged something ambivalent in return, expecting the jukebox not to work. He wouldn't have minded seeing it operate either. She plugged it in, turned it on, it hummed, black and red panels faintly illuminated. She inserted a 1 franc coin with a satisfying clunk, scanned a list of small typed cards with a smile, opted for number 198, and pressed the chunky buttons accordingly. Crouching down, she saw the arms magically select a record, a vinyl record, and then sat herself down on the arm of the settee. Laurent handed her baguette, and she took a small bottle of Orangina from her coat pocket. A few seconds later, as the first bars of the music played, "Hey, this isn't Clo-Clo," she exclaimed. It's loud though. What's it supposed to be? Asked Laurent. Eloise, but this isn't it, Corinne replied with a strained voice. Huh? He couldn't quite hear her. You know, "Où chacun nuit de miserably do," she sang, her bad impression making her cough and laugh at the same time. Or maybe you don't. Don't you know anything about music? She asked. I know this isn't it. This is something American. Slow. Sounds quite old. There, the guy says something about a phone ringing off the wall. It's good though. I like it. You're such an old square sometimes. This is the kind of song my mum would like. I know. I'll never be cool like you with your Descamp recorder and Claude Francois impressions. He smirked as she elbowed him. Corinne soon found a way to retrieve the 6-franc coins from the machine after every half hour of music, which she did repeatedly as the evening breezed by. Choosing a French song from the list, but often getting something else, was a novelty for her rarely found in modern machines. Being a semi-legitimate burglar and detective's assistant also held an uncommon excitement for her. Unhelpful as she had been, Laurent had stumbled upon several snippets of potentially useful information. Corinne mainly surveyed the scene and browsed the books, of which there were dozens. As a quieter record played and Laurent occupied himself, she leafed through a heavy tome. Did you know that gannets have no nostrils? Can't say that I did. Look, are you helping, or do you think your gannets and kitty-wax might hold a vital clue to this case? Laurent asked in a sarcastic tone, following it with an exasperated, I knew I shouldn't have brought her along, whisper to himself under his breath. Corinne laughed at kitty-wax, but was quick to counter, snapping the book shut. Who found the receipt from La Poste and the Superette, eh? Without me, you wouldn't have known that this Gary posted a 400-gram small packet to somewhere in the EU on... She held the ticket up close to her glasses and read, Thursday, 13 the 3rd, 14, at 14:52 p.m, and that it contained bibelot of no real value. 22 minutes later, he bought a rather optimistic sunblock stick, a Trois Meunier loaf, an œuf mimosa sandwich, a 75-centilitre bottle of diet water, and a double packet of chocolate palmier biscuits in the local superette. If you ask me, that sounds like someone about to go on a journey to somewhere sunnier. She walked over to Laurent and asked him to read the carbon paper douane declaration for the parcel, which was faint, smudged, and in the worst handwriting imaginable. He couldn't read it either, apart from the name of the addressee, which was M. Premoli, somewhere in Italy, possibly Liguria. It was quite probable that they would have to trace Monsieur Premoli at some point, so Laurent took a photo with his phone camera, along with the other receipts Corinne found, with the intention of possibly enhancing them somehow later with software. This information tied in with some erroneous multicoloured half-printed printouts Laurent had found in a waste paper basket earlier. One was a bed and breakfast reservation in Cagnes, and another, a few days later, was for Imperia, a coastal town in Liguria, quite possibly where Gary was going to meet Monsieur Premoli. If this was indeed the case, why anyone would post a parcel which they were able to deliver in person a few days later puzzled Laurent. He took more photos of the scene to send to his client. Without any idea what may or may not be on the memory cards, he figured it wise to pocket those too. He found a recent printout nearby of a lengthy statistical chemical analysis, a wide industrial printout dated 11/3/14, which, even though he couldn't understand a word of it, seemed recent enough to potentially be of relevance, so he slipped that into his jacket pocket. A control technique certificate with an advisory note for a handbrake, dated 28/2/14, was shoved next to the microwave, so he photographed that too, as it showed Gary's car had been legally roadworthy a mere 6 weeks ago. As he put his camera away, his eye was caught by the headlights of a police car pulling into the curb opposite. He quickly turned the kitchen light off, in time to see 2 cops talking to the agitated tenant of the house opposite by porch light. Moments later, the tenant pointed towards Laurent at the kitchen window. I wonder if he left some chocolate palmiers behind somewhere. I quite fancy some, Corinne interrupted, whining and rubbing her stomach. Laurent pulled her by the arm. It's nearly 2 a.m. Forget the biscuits, we need to be going.